Welcome to Behavioral Assessment and Intervention. The focus of this course is behavior. Behavior is anything that an individual says or does in reaction to a variety of interacting variables. It could be in reaction to something environmental, another individual, or even in reaction to something biological, something experienced within our bodies. Behavior can reflect underlying motivational states. Behavior can be influenced by instructional variables. So why study behavior? Well, we want to understand the underlying motivation. Now, so how do we do this? Well, as I said, behavior is a reaction to a number of variables. So, conducting an FBA is the way to go. The FBA identifies these relationships. An FBA, or Functional Behavioral Assessment, is an investigative process that results in an understanding of why behavior occurs. The ABC framework is key to this, and it represents a process for understanding these the relationships underlying behavior. A stands for antecedents, which happens before the behavior. B is the behavior or action, and C, the consequence. That's what follows after the behavior. And we use this framework to understand and change challenging behaviors by revealing triggers and reinforcing factors, and using this information to design effective interventions. So to review, A stands for antecedent. That's the event, trigger, or environmental factor that immediately precedes the behavior. For example, it could be a request from a parent, it could be a loud noise, a feeling of hunger, or a specific social cue. So that comes before the behavior. The B is the behavior, and that's the specific, observable, and measurable action or response. The response could be shouting, hitting, sharing toys, completing homework, or asking politely. And what comes after is the consequence. So that is what happens immediately after the behavior, which determines if the behavior is likely to happen again. For example, receiving praise, well, that's reinforcing. Getting a timeout, that is punishing. Gaining attention is reinforcing if the person wants attention. And avoiding a task, if that's what they want, is reinforcing. And these are consequences, examples of consequences. For homework, you'll be looking at 2 videos about positive and negative reinforcement and how that differs from punishment. And then you will provide examples for each of these. This slide illustrates the critical part about consequences. When the consequence serves a function, the behavior keeps being repeated. The function could be to get something, or it can be to avoid something. This slide shows you more about the function of behaviors. A child might be exhibiting a behavior to get something. Perhaps it is sensory stimulation, or it could be to get something that is social in nature from an adult or from a peer, or perhaps it is to get something tangible like a toy or access to an activity. Alternatively, the child might be engaging in a behavior to avoid or escape something. Perhaps there is sensory overload and the student is rocking to self-soothe, or perhaps the student is trying to escape something social related to an adult or a peer, or they are trying to escape an undesired activity. This slide goes more into detail regarding reinforcement, the consequences that increase the likelihood of a behavior occurring again. And there's several types of social positive reinforcement. It could be verbal, Attention comes in many forms. Even getting reprimanded is a form of attention. Attention can be more physical. It can also be nonverbal. Reinforcement can also be tangible, like getting a desired toy or activity. As you'll see in the homework videos, reinforcement can be positive and negative. With negative reinforcement, escape from something aversive is reinforcing, like getting out of a math activity that is undesired. Automatic reinforcement is self-stimulatory. A child might slam against a wall to gain deep pressure sensation. One of my cats loves deep pressure stimulation. She loves to be spanked on her lower back. She meows and positions herself to be spanked, believe it or not. Some children might be trying also to avoid certain stimulation, like loud noises. So you might see them do this. Positive automatic refers to gaining something, seeking something sensory, so slamming into walls for gaining deep pressure stimulation. Negative automatic refers to doing something to decrease negative stimulation, like flailing or rocking to self-soothe, or again, covering the ears. We'll be looking at a lot of behavioral pathways this semester and analyzing them. So in addition to the A, B, C, there are setting events, and setting events impact the antecedent. In this example, the target behavior is that Donald gets out of his seat. This behavior is triggered by being assigned math work. This behavior is maintained by the consequence he gets. He gets attention from his peers. But there's also a function it serves, not just obtaining attention. Donald also escapes the math activity. And here we also have a setting event, and setting events aren't directly observable. We will discuss this further in class. In this example, whenever Donald is late to school, it increases the likelihood that the antecedent will trigger the behavior. So by coming in late, he has missed the teacher's explanation and instruction related to the assigned math work, which increases the likelihood that he will want to escape the task. This is an activity that you will do for homework, where you will map out the ABCs for each scenario. This slide shows you the different methods of behavioral assessment that we will learn this semester. We will discuss them. And there are pros and cons to each one. Within direct methods, the pros include that you gain a lot of information from respondents who know the student well. Those are parents, caregivers, teachers, paras, service providers. We get a lot of information on ABCs. This information helps us figure out when and where to observe, which is the next method we will do. Now the con, the negative side to indirect method is that the data are subjective, because it is reported, it's self-report. Now, what about direct assessment? There are a lot of benefits. It's important that we get to see this with our own eyes. It's critical that we do that. And it also allows us to confirm the ABCs we learned about in our indirect methods. We can also observe variables that others have missed. For example, the teacher is part of the environment that affects the behavior, and so that is usually not reported because the teacher can't do that. And so that's why we have to observe with our own eyes. The con, though, is that there are reactive effects. Being present might affect the student's behavior. So when we are doing an observation, our mere presence could have an impact on the behavior. And then we're going to learn about a really important piece, the functional analysis. And the functional analysis actually is what confirms the ABCs for sure. And we will conduct both consequence and structural analysis. The consequence analysis tells us what the actual consequence is most definitively. And, is it to gain attention? Is it to escape? Is it both? A structural analysis manipulates antecedents, like seating arrangement, and that will provide important information. Now, a word about terminology, because there are a lot of terms and they're overlapping and they're important to understand. This course is about behavior, and you will hear a lot about PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention and Supports. And this falls under what you probably have been exposed to already, MTSS, Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. The PBIS is the behavior side of the house. You've been taught about RTI, I'm sure. But RTI actually has two parts. I'm sure what you've been exposed to so far is the RTI-A, which is academic RTI, systems of support around academics. But there's also RTI-B, which is the behavioral side of the house. So RTI-B is analogous to PBIS. There's also this MTSS-A, MTSS-B. Again, are we referring to academic support or are we referring to behavioral support? And it's important. It's important to know, because does a child exhibit behavioral difficulties because of academic deficits, or is it purely behavioral? In school, it's important to understand what is underlying a student's behavior, because it could be academically rooted. And I'm sure you've seen a graphic like this that shows RTI, but what's special about this, it shows you the two sides, that there's academic RTI and behavioral RTI, and we need both in schools. And this course, while we focus on behavior, we have to ask about the academics, because it directly could impact the behavior. All right, so next week we will start meeting on Zoom each week, and so please submit your homework assignment for today's class in order to get participation credit for session 1. See you next week on Zoom.